My name is Oscar Gittemeyer. I'm with the San Diego Public Library, and I would like to introduce our San Diego Poet Laureate, Dr. Jason Magabo Perez. He is the author of Phenomenology of Superhero, This is for the Mostless, and I Ask About What Falls Away. Perez's work has appeared in Interim Witness, The Feminist Wire, Maria Sampaguitas, TLD TD, San Diego Union Tribune, NPR's Here and Now, among others. He is also the recipient of a Challenge America grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. He's a previous artist in residence at the Center for Art and Thought and current Poet Laureate Fellow with Academy of American Poets. Perez has performed in notable venues such as the National Asian American Theater Festival, International Conference of the Philippines, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, La Jolla Playhouse, and the Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions. Perez serves as a core organizer of the Digital Sala and as a associate editor at Ethnic Studies Review. Perez is an associate professor of ethnic studies at California State University, San Marcos. Thank you, Dr. Perez.
Thank you, Oscar and Lali, for helping put this together. All of us, San Diego Public Library, it's been really wonderful to partner. I was telling some friends and colleagues today, I'm on sabbatical here at this campus, and so it's really and a fun experience, I guess, funny experience to drive back to campus and not work. I think that's fantastic, and I recommend it. 10 out of 10. But I'm really honored to be here in conversation with my comrade, Kasama, and friend Jen Soriano. I'm going to introduce Jen in a moment, but I wanted to read a little bit of poetry of my own as a sort of offering of solidarity to Jen, but also to all of you who are here and to folks who are really sort of navigating and negotiating, especially this particular historical moment on October 7th, as we know. Well, I'm sure that will come up in the conversation, but I want to offer this up in solidarity, certainly for those who have been, in many ways, the victims of his history, right? And I'll say that and sort of leave detail up for conversation. So I'll read a short little sequence here. I draft this, dear Kasama, against fishhooks of hope. I draft against slow elimination. I draft from soft interior of riot. I draft syllables of known sadness, such knowing, such evidence, such kitchen table phenomenology of you reading this, of this reading you. On a rainy morning, I see you through the window in a blue mask and black hoodie, delivering bags of groceries at the doorstep. I draft from collected stillness, restless ghosts archived in my veins. Consider this an intimate poetics of rage. Consider this rage divine refusal. Let us talk about such refusal. Let us talk about such dysregulation of promise. Let us talk about how much I miss you. This sadness is a politics. This sadness knows, this sadness holds, this sadness wants, warns, warms, sadness in the shadow of capital. Sadness against white supremacy, sadness against imperialism, sadness against tanks and tear gas, sadness blocking killer cop kneecap near neck, sadness that is in fact its own godforsaken solidarity statement. If you want to know what we are, melodramatic telenovela sadness, bulletproof sadness, clapback sadness, confessional sadness, abominous sadness, anti-colonial sadness, say, land back. Say, all power to the people. Say, I am the people. Say, I am not the pig. Say, makibaka. Say, makibaka. Say, junk anti-terror law. Say, demilitarize. Say, deoccupy. Say, para todos, todos. Say, la lucha se sigue. Say, hasta la victoria. Say, wagmatakot. Say, isulong. Say, ingat. Say, isang bagsak. Say, sadness. Sadness of my mother's and father's return from home to here, what could be a final return. Sadness of departures. Sadness of colonial removal. Sadness of perpetual displacement. Sadness, such sadness, so Filipino. Such sadness is relational urgency. Such sadness is abolitionist sadness. Such sadness is quotidian sadness. After the graveyard shift, black and brown nurses in gray and pink scrubs wait together at Valerio's City Bakery to order silogs and catering. And some of us over-theorize solidarity. In the middle of East 8th, large crows swoop on the carcass of an adorable dead possum, and across the street I see his and Hair's barbershop. And I believe whoever named this business should win the most prestigious of literary awards. And somewhere at work, your wrists and lungs ache, and your neck cramps, and you may be coughing and weak with fever, all inside this throb, this rot of racial capitalism. I ask about what falls away. I ask about where water sings. Here is surplus of sun, ocean of excess, remaindered song. Whose hands wash this sky? Who drains this sun against worry? Whose mighty ache makes history? This is where water drains, where gardens grow against worry, against the throb and rot. And the throb and rot knows nothing but the veil hiding hand from profit. Here is leftover rice and the wild imaginary of hunger. Here is a canal in the crook of the earth. And here is where water sings. And this is water singing us elsewhere. It is my absolute honor to introduce Jen Soriano, pronouns she, they, is a Filipinx American lyric essayist and performer living on unceded Duwamish territory in Seattle. They are the author of the chapbook Making the Tongue Dry and the lyric essay collection Nervous, which won the 2024 Memoir Prize. Jen has received fellowships from the Vermont Studio Center, Hugo House, Artist Trust, and the Jack Jones Literary Arts Retreat. They are particularly proud to have been selected as a Jack Jones Ye Day Up Fellow, thanks to a scholarship founded by Alexander Chi in honor of his grandmother. She is co-editor of with Amanda Solomon Amaral and DJ Cotton Candy, an anthology titled Closer to Liberation, Panay Panexi, Activism in Theory and Practice. She is also the author of Multiplicity from the Margins, published by Essay, a journal of nonfiction studies, which explores the potential of intersectional form to disrupt oppressive narratives and expand narrow worldviews. Jen was the 2022-2023 Poet in Residence with Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. She holds a BA in History and Science from Harvard and an MFA in Nonfiction and Fiction from the Rainier Writing Workshop at Pacific Lutheran University. She works as an organizational development consultant and narrative strategist for social justice institutions and is a co-founder of the Digital Rights and Narrative Power Building Organizations, Media Justice and Reframe. Please join me in welcoming Jen Soriano.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. It is such an honor to be here for this series, and also to be in conversation with your poet laureate and my longtime comrade, literary friend, Jason. I am also going to start with a reading. It is a reading from Nervous, from the essay called Unbroken Water. And it is I think, very synchronous, serendipitous that you ended with the poem that you ended with, Jason, in talking about how the water sings and the water leads the way. Because this is an excerpt from an essay about water leading the way. In the 1970s, a river in the northern Philippines was ground zero in a global battle for tribal sovereignty and water rights. The Chico River, the largest tributary of the Philippines' longest river, seduced energy industrialists with the might of its current. In 2002, I went to see this river. I lived beside it for days, and it seduced and embraced me as well. The Chico River is to the northern Philippines what the Missouri River is to the American Midwest. It is a lifeline, an artery, a cranial nerve that connects the vital organs of regional ecosystems. The Cordillera region of the northern Philippines, where the Chico River cuts through mountains like the soul nerve of the land, is home to more than 1.3 million indigenous people who belong to different ethno-linguistic groups, including the Kalinga, Bontoc, and Kankanay. Of these 1.3 million, hundreds of thousands rely on water drawn from the Chico River to supply communal irrigation systems for rice and vegetable farms, and to provide fresh water for drinking, ritual, and sustenance for the native forests that blanket the Kalinga and mountain provinces. How to describe the Chico? I have seen the Chicago River, which is efficient and architectural, like a middle-aged stockbroker. I have seen the Missouri River, which is ponderous and deep, like a wise and well-seasoned elder. I have seen the Pasig River, which in parts of Manila looks more like land than water, thickened with plastic bags and styrofoam cups and shreds of litter, immobilized like Lazarus waiting to rise from the dead. Meanwhile, the Chico runs before us like a vibrant young being, exuberant and bursting with potential. It is a waterfall in river form. The Chico Dam project threatened to break this river and its sacred relationship to the Cordillera people. It would trap the Chico's currents, inundate local villages, displace more than 100,000 humans, and drown endemic animals and native forests. But the Cordillera people do not easily submit to their own destruction. The Cordillera people use bamboo for temporary structures because they know it is sustainable. This is just one example of how they steward indigenous forests for the sake of preserving both sacred land and sacred water. In the Ifugao region south of Kalinga, certain trees like the alimit and tuol are never harvested because they maintain groundwater for rice terraces and forest lots used for sustainable timber. Century-old trees like the balete are also preserved because they are inhabited by anitos, or the spirits of ancestors. When they do harvest, Ifugao people choose only mature timber trees in a practice of selective cutting. And before one is cut, a local conducts rituals to ask permission from the ancestors. When they receive permission and a tree is harvested, they immediately replace it by planting 2 seedlings. This system not only preserves the forests while ensuring adequate wood, it also preserves the water supply. The Cordilleran concept of inayan is key to this process. Inayan involves rituals to preserve land, water, and forest to harmonize the interdependence of human and natural resources. Kalinga culture bearer Sapi Bauer takes this interdependence a step further. He says those who live in the Cordilleras maintain the forests and the river not just because they live from them, but because they are one with them. Their identities are one and the same. Our first evening in Kalinga, friends and I stay with a host family as we wait for the rest of our delegation to arrive. Their home is small yet majestic, built from Nara wood, a rich brown timber used to make houses and also to carve statues of rice gods. We sleep in a sparse open room on the 2nd floor of the host family's home. And I begin to drift off, thinking about the Kalinga people and decolonization. According to some indigenous people, Decolonization involves restoring indigenous sovereignty, preserving indigenous relationships with nature, and returning stolen land to the original residents who stewarded it for thousands of years. This would not be a regression. There is no going back to a past before capitalism and imperialism. But it may be our only way forward, especially in the context of growing climate disruption. I fall asleep and dream. What could happen if indigenous people and all defenders of nature led the next phase of evolution toward true interdependence?
Cool. So I'll start with a question to lead us off a little bit. So Nervous tells us stories about Filipino history, as you've detailed even in that excerpt, as a resource of historical trauma, and also about Filipino culture as a source of healing and resilience. So if you can share with us your thoughts, what is historical trauma and how can culture be a vehicle for healing historical trauma?
So historical trauma is a framework and a concept that was created by Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, who's a Lakota scholar. And she developed it as a way to describe the accumulated impacts of massively devastating events. So for the Lakota and for many Native Americans, right, historical trauma frameworks encompassed all of the otherwise sort of unexplainable and disjointed and disconnected types of impacts from things like displacement, genocide, death from smallpox, the boarding schools, and then the flip side then of that framework was that Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart then also developed this historical trauma healing approach that was really grounded in reconnecting Lakota people to their original lifeways, their cultural medicine, the things that colonization had and these mass traumatic events that had happened as a result of colonization had separated them from. So when I learned about this framework, it was actually one of the major motivating factors for me in writing the book, because without trying to respect the really unique histories of Native Americans, I also saw that there was some parallels to really any culture that has been targeted and experienced mass traumatic events like continued repeated natural disasters over time. And the Philippines, as many of us know, is one of those cultures. And so I started to just delve into the kind of historical trauma narrative, is what Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart calls it, of some Filipinos, right? There's how many million of us now? 90 million or something in the world or more, right? So there's clearly not just one narrative for all Filipinos, but there are a series of, unfortunately, not super well covered events in the history of the Philippines, in which the U.S. is very implicated in some of them, that I wanted to be able to expose and lift up in a way that it could become almost like common knowledge, so that we can move on from it. Not so that we dwell in it, right? But so that everything that we carry in our bodies that comes from 381 plus years of colonization not fully being processed, and the grief of everything that has been lost, so that this could be, an offering to naming that loss, which is one of the pieces of Braveheart's framework, naming and claiming the loss, and then being able to use cultural traditions, like I write about the tradition of bayanihan, which in old times in the Philippines was about actually working with the environment and literally like grabbing a bunch of neighbors and carrying somebody's house and moving it away from rising tides during flood season. And to me, that is such a metaphor for a lot of cultural values in the Philippines that contribute to a collective form of resilience. And so in the book, I talk about, well, what are our modern day versions of bayanihan that can help us deal with things like climate crisis and, ongoing racism and militarization. As we process, the historical traumas of the past, really the point is so that we can be able to face what's ahead of us in ways that that bring in our whole selves.
But I want to maybe take a moment just to reflect a little bit on sort of what you bring up. I think what I appreciate about, in particular, that what you're just sort of laid out in terms of a framework from a Lakota cultural worker or thinker to name to try to get at naming the Filipino, well, I guess not Filipino colonial condition, right? And I think like what's really empowering about that sort of in some ways a citational practice, but also a sort of a reading solidarity, right? It really sort of opens up our thinking to really consider not only the ways in which these sort of massive traumatic events are interrelated, right? Like the colonization and sort of the havoc that the U.S. wreaked on the Philippines, that's ongoing, right? Couldn't happen unless they set up the sort of the settler colonial project that is the United States, right? And sort of that this being founded on violent anti-indigeneity, violent anti-black racism, chattel slavery, and these sort of historical forces, right? And so, in the sense that those are interrelated, right? Then the healing becomes interrelated, right? And so this is where I think that sort of solidarity is, it's sort of there, sort of in very, at least for me, very clearly in my work, right? Yeah. In your work, right? Sorry. Yeah. But thank you. So I want to sort of move on maybe to a little bit more contemporary reflection. I know that, as those of us who are writers in the room or dabble in writing, sometimes I like to say I'm a writer, and then sometimes I don't like to say I'm a writer. I like to think and be in conversation like this. But I know a book takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of patience. But the world keeps moving, right? And so I want to maybe ask some contemporary reflections and how you might think about your book in these kind of contexts, right? So as we're having this event, communities across the southeast United States are dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, which is being called the most devastating hurricane to hit U.S. land after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico and Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana. People need cash, water, food, power. Given this, what good, if any, is poetry and lyric essay? What can literature do in the face of climate tragedy?
I think that anybody who is a writer or writes things or creates any kind of art can relate to, this feeling sometimes of like, well, what good is this? And when people just need to survive. And I have a good friend who is out there in Asheville, who I think you may know as well, Tony Robles, who is a poet. And his family was severely affected by the hurricane. His mother and stepfather had to be airlifted out of the mountains. They're dealing with just not knowing when they can even go back to their homes. They're thinking it might be a year before his parents can even go back to the area where they have had a house. And so in the middle of this, what does Tony do? He's writing poems. And, I see people sharing those poems everywhere on the internet. A lot of people from across the Southeast, from Florida up to Virginia, sharing his poems. And I think it's because he's helping give voice to an experience that people are feeling extremely overwhelmed and challenged by. And to see their experience or something of their experience reflected back in a way that gives sort of that. I think poetry is so powerful because it evokes so much emotion, right? And so, his poetry is evoking the grief and despair and a little bit of the, like, what just happened kind of feeling of how bad Helen has become. And then also some real beauty and hope. And as an example of that, I cut and pasted one of his poems and want to share it with you because it is, I think it speaks to this question, right? So here is one poem that he wrote and shared. And again, this is a reminder that all types of art are forms of cultural resilience and resistance. So this is called Power After Hurricane Helene by Tony Robles. We have no power, we have no lights, we have darkness, and stars and crickets, and splinters that have pierced our roads, and the skin of our homes and our eyes. We grope about looking for a candle to find the light in our eyes, searching for the doorknob, the keyhole, perhaps the light is there. We have no power. But I've met neighbors here that I've never spoken to, and in the calmness of night, I see the light in their eyes, as they see the light in mine. And we realize somehow we have power. So, there's just this sort of testament, I think, to the ways, it can sound really cliche, but the ways that we can come together in disaster is just something that we can never have enough reminders of. And I was in New Orleans shortly after Katrina, doing work with school children who had no schools left. And then I was also in Puerto Rico twice after Hurricane Maria. And I think, in both of those cases, I was doing some direct relief work. But the thing that stands out most to me in both of those times of going back was the ways that people not only came together to help each other have water, have generators, have micro solar panels for energy, but the ways that people came together to share art in the midst of all of that. In New Orleans, the kids were literally dancing in the streets. And as a way partly to process the fact that they didn't have a school anymore. And, in Puerto Rico, there was a whole barrio, almost like open mic session that happened at a basketball court. And, it was also a way to get people there to distribute supplies. So I think there's a lot of ways that literature and poetry can be powerful vehicles for processing emotion, gathering people, and also, like I write about in the book, be these sort of somatic neural processes of metabolizing what could potentially be traumatic, but what doesn't automatically have to be a traumatic event. It's always, these types of disasters are always events of loss and grief, but they don't actually automatically have to be traumatic. And the difference usually comes in the quality and systemic setup of cultural and survival support.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So in some of the examples that you just shared, well, we might read that as a kind of resilience, right? So when these disasters happen, these massive traumatic events happen, we often look to the and I'll put victims in quotes here, as having some sort of resilience, right? A cultural resilience, I guess, is how we can sort of talk about it. And yet, Filipino-American psychologist E.J.R. David, whom you reference in Nervous, says that he rejects the notion of resilience as a solution. He says specifically for Filipinos, resilience is a given. But what we really need to talk about is how do we change the oppressive systems so we don't need to be resilient? How does this relate to how we can draw on culture to prevent or address climate trauma?
All right. Okay, so I'm gonna really emphasize the last part of that question, which is how do we actually draw on cultural resilience to then emphasize systemic changes that we need. Because I still think that there is something really important to emphasize about cultural resilience. And the first thing is that cultural resilience is not individual, it's collective, right? So it's not about like, you be resilient, you alone have to just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and survive this hurricane. You know, it's about what kinds of connections or reconnections and reclamation can we make to certain types of cultural practices that can really support our well-being and survival. I'm sure there are some cultural practices in the South that folks are drawing from right now, right, with Hurricane Helene. And just wanted to share like a few really amazing things from a study that a professor named Elizabeth DeCastro did after Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, which was 2013. Typhoon Haiyan was the strongest and most devastating storm the Philippines has ever faced, and might be one of the deadliest really in the whole world. There was 10,000 people that died from Typhoon Haiyan. And she did a study in the aftermath to see what were the kinds of things that helped the people who did survive recover, because there was extraordinary recovery efforts. And I have a friend who works for Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, who actually knew people who were part of the Doctors Without Borders brigade who had set up in Tacloban to help with relief. And that brigade actually packed up and left because they decided they were not needed. And they decided they weren't needed because they saw that there was, and this is sort of both cultural and systemic, there's a global infrastructure, for better or for worse, of remittances that goes back to the Philippines from overseas workers. And you know that's a product of a colonial economy that basically exports human labor as a primary export. And one of the ways that Filipinos have sort of flipped that system is around the culture of, you know, pakikisama. We're going to always make sure we have our families back, and they're going to send money home at all times. Because of that global infrastructure, there was so much money coming in, Filipinos supporting Filipinos from all over the world to help with resources and material recovery, that there were supplies, there was money, there was resources. And Médecins Sans Frontières didn't actually even need to be contributing more to that. But then also, more so on the cultural tip, they realized that it was time to pack up and leave, and they were just intruding. When one night there was a kind of like kundiman, like, I don't know, like love song fest that happened kind of in some of the camps, right? And everybody was just singing love songs to each other. And apparently then everybody started making love. Okay. And so Médecins Sans Frontières was like, okay, all right, they're good. Let's get out of here. And so DeCastro studied some of the cultural and kind of psychosocial things behind this. And some of the things that she shared were the practice of pagdadala. Tell me if I'm pronouncing any of this wrong, which is shared burden bearing. So not just, you know, walking alongside someone, but really we're going to carry this burden together. Then there's also pagsama, ginhawa, paglaum, or hope. So to accompany another on their path to wellness, to bear witness on the path to wellness. That's the kind of hope that we're talking about. And then katatagan, which is steadfastness. And then I'll share just these last two, which I absolutely love. Balik kalipay, which is joy as compass, right? So joy as compass out of the storm. And then urabayan, which comes from Old Tagalog. Urabay, it comes from the Tagalog elders of Quezon, and it means a native umbrella made out of nipa. And the metaphor is about the way that the sacred and the divine will protect us all. So there's, I just found that those were so powerful, and to be able to kind of reconnect to those values and be able to put them into practice it's apparently make a huge difference in recovery, even after such a deadly storm as Haiyan. But, I think that maybe the other half of the equation, I should say, because I don't think it's a more important point, I think it's just part of the same kind of holistic solution, is how do we have more systemic solutions upstream and not just the downstream approach of mitigation and, coping. I write about an example in the book, and this is what I'll end on, which is sort of using the example of the effort to clean up the Pasig River in Manila as both a metaphor and actually a model of how to look at how to combine cultural values of resilience together with actual action for systemic change in order to prevent and mitigate climate disasters from hopefully before they happen, right? So you had heard me read a line about the Pasig River, which was that there's parts of the Pasig River that look like land because of how polluted it is. So here's a shot of the widest part of the canal of the Pasig River. So then let's look at a strategy that essentially applied the cultural value of barangay or like barrio or like kind of village-based organizing to the cleanup of the river. So this is one of the esteros of the Pasig River, which means like a tributary of the Pasig River. And this is in an area called Paco. So you can see that it kind of looks like land, right? It looks like a dump. So one of the strategies that they came up with to clean the whole river was, well, what if we actually, instead of, just trying to, dredge some of the main canal, what if we actually dealt with the infrastructure in all of these barrios, in these little esteros? And so they looked at a systems change approach that involved actually organizing with the communities in the barangays and not just dealing with the river itself, but also with what was around the river. So that public market had essentially been abandoned and had kind of been taken over, honestly, by drug dealers. And so there was a big push for economic revitalization in this barrio, where they reactivated the public market with vendors. They installed septic tanks where there was no way to deal with sewage before that. Much of Manila does not have a way to deal with sewage. So they installed septic tanks at the barrio level to keep sewage out of the water. They created a recycling program that's run by river warriors that are stipended community organizers who collect recycling and also do education with children. And they did a plan around remediation of the water using native plants. And so they also planted native plants that could help filter the water and that would also buffer from flooding. And so a lot of this was based on not just how do we clean the Pasig. the question really was, how do we prevent the ongoing flooding of Manila that happens because of the Pasig pollution and because of climate change by improving the infrastructure in all of these barrios where the esteros are most impacted. And this is what it looked like after. And I have been there recently, and it really does still look almost like that. Almost. And so, you know, if you see the red lines on this, so the blue line is the Pasig, the main channel of the Pasig that goes to Manila Bay on the west side. All of those red lines that are coming out of the river kind of channel are the blocked esteros. And so, you know, there's been an effort to really bring that project, that pilot project, to scale to prevent this level of flooding all over the Metro Manila area. So you can see that's maybe almost 50% of the Metro Manila area that's affected by flooding because of these polluted esteros. So that is a story that I tell at the end of Nervous in the essay that's called Watershed. And I use that also not just as a literal example of climate change mitigation and upstream solutions at the community level, but also as a metaphor for how we can start to process the accumulated trauma that runs through the rivers of our nerves, and how we can do that through collective practices that can help prevent the storm and flooding of stress hormones and PTSD effects that can build up in our bodies if we don't pay attention to them and try to metabolize them towards cleaner waters.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that sort of way to, I think what the way that you talk about resilience is in a way to not dismiss it, and to sort of think of resilience as not like we just stop there, right? Like that's the horizon. It's actually a tactic, right? It's a strategy, right? It gives us the knowledge to sort of build and sort of innovate toward our healing, right? And I think it's incredibly beautiful. So thank you. We're going to open it up to audience questions if you have any, or comments. Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Could you hear me? Thank you so much for Jen for reading the chapter on the Chico River. I grew up in Baguio City, so the Chico River obviously has a big effect on us. I especially appreciated that you mentioned Macleing Dulag, who is a hero in the Cordillera region. I immigrated here to the U.S. when I was 21, and later on when I became a mother, I thought of naming my daughter Cordillera. But then I thought, she'll have to explain this. And in the Philippines, we pronounce it Cordillera with L-Y. So I had mercy on her. I named her Gabriela, which is still in the Philippines. Gabriela is a woman warrior who is very well known. So I really want to thank you for reading that. I come from a generation that is aware of martial law and also the EDSA People Power Revolution. I was in high school or entering college when that happened. So we do have a culture of resilience. So needless to say, I also come from a culture where we had to be resilient. And my mother's and the previous generation and my generation did not have the benefit of mental health insurance. But now I'm a mother, and of course, during the pandemic, that was critical to my children. So what I want to ask you are two things. One is, how do you deal with naysayers who discount birth trauma? A large part of your book is discovering your pain and relating it back to the birth trauma. And an easier question, do you still sing with your band?
Jason was one of our only fans. I'll start with the easy question. Not regularly, but I'm still in touch with most of the band members, and so we will play for certain things, for events, for community events. Like what we're probably going to play in February for the 20th death anniversary of my friend BJ, who I write about in the book. And it's naysayers. Well, I guess, first of all, I think there's probably some self-selection going on in people who read my book and talk to me about my book. So I wouldn't say that there's been a lot of naysayers. I think there's been a lot of people who already really understand that it's an issue and struggle with it themselves, who I end up in conversation with. But I am familiar with these naysayers that you speak of. And I think the first thing for me is always to come from a place of understanding that dealing with trauma is really difficult. And it's so difficult that some people have really reflexive avoidance of it. And so, that's an example of a sort of trauma-informed approach to naysayers, that they may be naysayers because they may be carrying a lot of trauma that they are scared to face. And, the part of the reason that I do put so much science in the book, besides the fact that I'm a nerd, and also because it's kind of one of the lenses that I see the world through, is that, I really get excited about how much science is confirming what I think a lot of spiritual people already knew around how much trauma can be transmitted over generations, and also how deeply trauma can affect us for our entire lifetimes, especially if it happens in infancy or early childhood. The science behind it is pretty much airtight. And so I guess I would probably, if I was trying to convert a naysayer, I would point them toward the scientific studies and towards books like Nadine Burke-Harris's The Deepest Well, which was one of the first books that I read about the connections between early childhood adversity and lasting traumatic impacts in the body. Yeah. I think that was it.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for your very lovely talk. I haven't read your book yet, but I was one of Dr. Solomon's former students, and that's how I was introduced to your work. Yay. And she also advertised this on her Instagram, so it's like, I have to go. But anyways, my question, or I guess something I'm trying to grapple with now, I'm, I guess what you can consider a second generation immigrant. My parents immigrated here to the States, to San Diego particularly, and we've lived here for our entire lives. So yeah, I was basically born, raised here all my life, and I feel like it was only through college that I started to gain a better idea and understanding that I want to learn more about my culture, my identity, and my history. And it's only like very recently that I've understood and appreciated that I come from a very resilient background. And as an ate, as an older sister, I have a younger sister who's also feeling very disconnected from all of this. And of course I want to help her, like, introduce her more to our culture. I guess that just seems like such a complicated, complex issue. And so I guess I was wanting to ask for your advice on where would I start to even begin to show my sister this. She's currently a sophomore in high school, so she still has so much more to know and to understand. But yeah, we're exactly 6 years and 3 days apart, so there is quite an age gap. but I do want to introduce her to these things from an earlier age because that's what I definitely could have benefited from when I was younger.
You're such a good ate.
Thank you.
I wish I had an older sister like you. That's wonderful. And I would start with, seeing what she's already gravitating towards. What is she like? What's an example of what she likes?
She already takes part in a bunch of community service organizations on her own. And I think that that's something that my parents tell us often is that, community service is basically, embedded in our DNA. And that's something that's, been passed down from our ancestors is that we always love to help others and give back. And so I'd say that's definitely be a way to help bridge that cultural disconnect.
There you go. You just answered your own question. Well, because I think the fact of where you are is I would just say really just take advantage, encourage you to take advantage of connecting her with any of the abundant resources. There's so many resources here in SoCal for Filipino culture that that so many places in the rest of the country don't have. And so, whether if it's community service, there might be like 6 to 7 options there around places to connect her with. The other thing is that there is a growing body of resources online that's available as well. Everything from, art and culture stuff like poetry and, music to histories like this. The values that I shared from De Castro's report are in a blog that Lenny Strobel posted, So I wonder about, curating a little package, right? Yeah. Here comes the professor.
What part? Do you mind if I ask what part of SD you're from?
Born and raised in Southeast San Diego.
Born and raised.
Yeah,
Okay,
so National
cool.
City, Paradise Hills.
Hey, they're doing it. They're doing it down there. I mean, there was a major flood that hit Southeast, hit Encanto, and in solidarity with the Black communities there. The Filipino community is definitely organizing around there. I think there's definitely I think one of the things that is not necessarily unique because I grew up in Oceanside actually, but also have spent most of my adult life in San Diego. I think that there have been many efforts. I mean, Amanda's efforts around camp. And I don't know if she ever talked about that, but they used to run the Kuya Ate Mentorship Program, which is modeled off of PEP, which is the Filipino Education Partnerships Program, run by Dr. Tintianco Cubales up at SF State. They used to bring Filipino culture classes to the high schools specifically and to the young folks. I'm not sure how active they are right now, but I think that there are enough of us in education that are down to support, right? So I would say hit up Dr. Solomon and say, you talk to us and that we should curate even like a Google Doc. We could just open up a Google Doc, a Jamboard, and just throw down and say, hey, this documentary is good, it's short, this is what it hits. Because we engage this stuff every day, right? So that's not difficult and that's much needed if we can't get together for a workshop, right? Like I have some friends who run a sort of children's literature sort of group called Kababayan Kids, and they're on Instagram, but they're running mostly out of Vallejo, right? But they're coming down here to Southwestern College in Chula to do a kid story time, and they do things around language, but there's always sort of this angle around sort of telling our stories for us and our perspective, you know what I mean? And so I think it's important to maybe go to the professors or not even professors, but the community organizers that you trust, and also trust yourself. You've learned so much already. Start sharing that, and I know that it's a difficult thing to to bring some of this home to family, because college is such a weird, strange, especially in the United States, weird, alienating thing. That I think that a lot of what we might find the power of is what we might find power in is maybe modeled after certainly what Jen is picking up on in terms of rebuilding these sort of infrastructures, right? Where like that education, right, on the one hand, thankfully, your sister will have to take an ethnic studies class. I will say I don't know if I can guarantee that they'll talk about Filipinos up in that class. Do you know what I mean? But there's a way where we can build outside of the institutions, where we have reading groups, or her and her peers just get together, right? At restaurants, or just sort of things like that. I think that there's just a lot of ways to invite folks to explore, because once we're able to help each other see these things about ourselves and about our communities, we can't unsee it, right? And we become committed to undoing those structures that have sort of put us in this place of not knowing how to name our pain, right? Not knowing how to name that trauma.
Thank you both so much.
Hello, and again, thank you so much for you both being here. And just to your point, because I grew up in the 1900s, so I didn't have stuff like this. I didn't have prolific writers, and I wear jewelry made by young Panays. My T-shirt, represents Chef Ponseca's restaurants in New York. And I just, I'm excited for you, and you are a badass ate to even worry about it. And I love how you said, Jason, you're doing it. And like Jen said, but back to your book, Jen, and I appreciate the first person who asked a question about if you still do your music thing, because I was like the exact opposite of the stereotypical Asian. I can't do freaking math. I don't understand science. I'm a drummer. I like to write, etc. But Jen, the way that you broke down the scientific research, explanations, even I could understand, and I got excited about it. And the fact that you were like sharing when you were, I think in the Bay Area with your band, and the pulsating, just like, when you were reading your poem, Jason, I was rocking to the rhythm and the power of your words. And you both do the same thing. And to emphasize the positivity without being like, candy at, penny, just saccharine kind of stuff, but real. I happened to have the honor of going to Lahaina to help some of the Ilocanos. And we learned, don't give them wheat bread and mustard. They were asking for bagaong and patis and rice, because that's what makes them strong and healthy. And I like how you alluded to not just resilience, but to incorporate what our ancestors already, what our nervous system or what our nutrition needs. The things that it's okay and it's safe to talk about that stuff, because there's a lot of people today that won't make you feel alone or silly or sad, because they've been struggling with it too. And we don't have to, I don't know the Filipino word, but the shame word, what's the shame word? Yeah. Because my accent is jacked up. Exactly. But anyway, so I was sharing with my new friend, Arlene, I get to go to the Philippines in a week. So I want to learn more about and share what you guys are saying in combating climate struggles. Like right here, in San Diego, they could have avoided that, right? Because the infrastructure was such that it wasn't protecting those neighborhoods. But I'm really babbling now, but thank you so much. And you guys can watch her on YouTube with her band. Yeah. But thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jez. I actually went to one of your workshops a couple months back with Greg. I don't know if you remember me.
Yeah.
So just quick plug-in. AB Samhan, SSU, I'm the graduate student advisor. They have high school conferences. That's probably one of your best ways to, your sister. Anyways, my question is, you talked about the Pagdadala model, and I'm very familiar with that because I read it, and I'm familiar with E.J.R. David's work. So I'm curious to know, when I first met you back then, what did you know? And now, you know, talking about your book, and kind of like, I'm very aware of like intergenerational trauma issues, epigenetics. So I'm kind of curious to know like Pakikisama, even like Kapwa, like what are things that you know now, kind of during your journey and after writing your book?
That's a great question. So I very much wrote the book with the cultural value of Kapwa and Pakikisama in mind. So Kapwa is a self and others. It's a core value of Filipinos and a grounding value in psikoholehiyong Filipino, which is a framework of Filipino-specific psychology. So Kapwa, self and others. I wanted my book to be a love letter to interdependence. That was sort of the beacon that I kept in terms of all of the information that I was trying to share. I was like, is it serving the purpose about interdependence, love letter to interdependence? Pakikisama is one of those tricky things that can be both good and bad. And it is really about accompaniment and being kind of one with the group. But so, you know, there's a lot of Pakikisama that is involved with the cultural practice, healing practice of activism. That was very healing for me. But I also touch a bit on how Pakikisama can also be a source of depression and anxiety, particularly for young Pinays. So, you know, every strength can be a weakness, right? Double-edged sword. And I think that is actually an area of Psikolohiyong Pilipino and Filipino mental health that I would love to see more and more writing about, is kind of exploring those tensions and personal stories around it. Pagdadala, I did not know about. I do remember I asked you about it. I was like, oh, I want to know more. And I just happened to start having a conversation with Professor Lenny Strobel about her work around Filipino culture, cultural values, and climate coping. And so she was the one that introduced me to ginhawa, which is breath, and pagdadala, and then guided me towards Elizabeth de Castro's work. So it's an example of how I think through this whole process of writing the book and sharing it and being able to talk about it through conversations like this has really allowed me to continue on this sort of like flow journey, right? Like going back to water, of learning myself. And now I'm like all about and like kind of obsessed with Pagdadala. I would love to talk to you more about it at some point. Yeah. Thank you.
And I did see just one last hand right here. Did you want to ask the last question for us?
I think just like what you're talking about, how Pakikisama is complicated and reflects the tension. Like, do you remember when you were perhaps a naysayer, that you were radicalizing, or that moment of consciousness, the aha moment, and maybe share any wisdom from those early moments with folks that might be moving in that direction, or at least curious about it?
And when you ask that, do you mean the moments around political radicalization or healing, or what? Or what?
However you feel, because I feel that there is going to be healing in those moments as well, but maybe some wisdom, because it's ongoing, right? It's circular and it's continuous. But the earlier ones where we're still embodying the naysayer, what are some moments that you can remember that had maybe carried you through to what was beyond that, that might have helped either in the conditions, or what was your surplus, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can share one particular moment that is related also to environment and climate. And it's an example of how I think pakikisama and kapwa can actually work in positive ways. So when I came to the Bay Area, I was about to be sicker than I had ever been. I was about to lose the use of my arms for a little while. I was in extreme pain, and I pretty much got every virus that came by because my immune system was so suppressed. I was also working at the time at a Filipino ecology center that was called Pusod, and while I worked there, I met some people who became really important people in my life, one of whom is also a poet. Surprise, surprise. Her name is Amy Suzara. And she, at the time, was really involved with an organization called FACES, Filipino American Coalition for Environmental Solutions, that did, U.S. military base cleanup advocacy and also health advocacy for people affected by cancer, birth defects, things like that. And I think at the time I was very, very deep in my own naysaying, to the point that I would work 16-hour days, even though I was severely pretty sick. And I think that Amy's example of her activism, and particularly her connection with a young girl named Crystal, who died. Was it Cristal? Crizelle, thank you. I was like, is her name Cristal? Crizelle, thank you. Crizelle, who died of cancer related to contamination from the U.S. military bases. She was so connected with her. She had an altar to her. She, had videos of her playing with her. And, that was one of the moments that I remember that really kind of slowed me down and helped me focus on health and the body in relationship to the environment in a way that I had never done before, because I was so in trauma, freeze, disconnection mode. It's nice to have folks around us in our ecosystems who can be examples of what we're longing for.
I do just want to share the video from our partner that helped made this program possible. The UCSD All of Us team here, they are our local partners here in San Diego, and they are the reason programs like this are happening. I'll play a short video about the work that they're doing here in San Diego.
The All of Us research program is an ambitious effort to gather health information from 1 million or more people across the U.S. Researchers will be able to use this information to uncover new, more precise ways to prevent and treat disease and to keep people healthy.
The Asian American community is the fastest growing demographic group in the U.S. There are needs that go along with that population growth. Healthcare is pretty central among them.
The majority of the people do not speak English, so having culturally appropriate services is a must for our community.
We not only have diversity in culture and language, but we also have diversity in our healthcare risk.
Immigrants come here for better opportunities for their children. You invest a little more now, and then you get the payoffs in the future.
This is an opportunity to be seen, this is an opportunity to be heard, and this is an opportunity to contribute to an initiative that may potentially change lives going forward.
Thank you so much, everyone.